when you talk about these issues of globalization that don't have to do with economic causes,
right.
But with things like the globalization of people, immigration, refugees, what do you think what do you think can be done, if anything, to bridge the gap between what you might think of as an increasingly globalized, cosmopolitanized world and the enormous number of people who, as you say, feel left behind, not just economically?
When you think about what's happening with immigration in the United States, you have to think about the 19th century. We've had crises over immigration in the 1840s. We had an American party called the Know-Nothings. From 1880 to 1920, just straight conflict from then on over immigrants. And so, you know, cultural assimilation doesn't come that easy to the United States. Ethno-racist legislation in 1920 and 1924 and 1929 that restricts immigration, and in both in numbers and in who gets into the country, in an odd way becomes a blessing because it gives us a kind of breathing space to assimilate. It also was one of the reasons we had unionization in the 1930s, because if you think about it, at a time when the economy is in trouble is not necessarily a good time to organize unions. But we also didn't have a tremendous labor surplus at the time, so it turned out to be okay. So again, we've had this experience before, and we've had this tremendous wave of immigration from 1965. It's gone from like, what, 4% to 13% of the population. I'm not unsympathetic to the idea of a breathing space in two respects. More priority on high-skilled rather than unskilled, and maybe even going from, like, let's say, 1.2 million to 600,000 a year, something like that. So I think that's important for the process of assimilation. The second thing is the issue of economic security. I don't think we're ever going to get around to a point where we have 2% unemployment every year. We're always going to have, and I don't think we're going to be able to avoid recessions. But we have to rid Americans and rid ourselves of the kind of everyday anxiety that we feel about health care, about education, educating our children, about our old age. We have to do some of the same things that the Europeans did 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. So that's an important element. I think that'll change the country. The last thing I'll say is that one of the things that was most mistaken about the kind of utopian economic ideas in the 90s was that instead of believing that we were going to convert the Chinese or the Koreans or the Japanese into liberal capitalist countries, we should recognize that some of what they do would benefit us in terms of industrial planning, in terms of developing advanced manufacturing in the Midwest and in many of these areas now that are virtually ghost towns. So again, I'd say those three things. Now that would be my platform for America.